Hello there. I'm sure you've read the title of the video and can guess what the main topic of this video is going to be. So let's get started. Oh, by the way, I've looked back at the size of this video and wanted to make a little more bite-sized. So I'm not going to make a whole hour-long documentary that you guys will have to look over, but it'll be broken down into parts. So the series, if I decide to continue with it, will be based on major issues within gameplay that I've noticed, while the series will be broken down into parts and different topics. One of the core issues is that many of these problems are interconnected with one another, so some videos may touch on other videos which will interact with other topics. For example, gunplay can interact with the way maps are created, because maps allow players to possibly exploit certain gun and movement mechanics, but I probably won't make a video on maps and gunplay together, but rather a video on maps and a separate video on gunplay and commentate the connections. Alright, without any further ado, let's get into the economy and issues with guns. First of all, what is the point of an economy? COPS is within a tactical FPS genre based off of, as most of you know, CSGO. The purpose of the economy in this standpoint is to allow for a greater diversity of weapons to be used in the game and give more depth to the round and weapons usage, as players have the variable of money to now consider. The economy presents itself as a major necessity for players, since more money essentially means more guns, or better guns at least. So players try to save more money to obtain better weapons, which they then use to have a better chance at winning gunfights, the core of winning a round and eventually the game. Some guns are cheaper and are simply meant to offer situational benefits, for example how shotguns and SMGs are supposed to give more money back to players due to them having a kill multiplier. If you don't know what that means, it's basically how a normal kill is $400, like with the rifle, but if you get a kill with the shotgun has a 3x money multiplier and will return you $1,200 per kill. Of course, this is an extremely watered-down version of the economy and does not include each of the types of rounds and guns, etc. For that, there are plenty more videos on YouTube to cover. Now let's enter the issues COPS is facing. Now before I go on, I know that KSG will be nerfed in the next update, but I will use it as an example to convey the idea behind the problem that, so this issue does not occur in the future from an economic perspective. The issue being that there is a gun in the game at a very achievable price point, since the KSG costs only $2,600 and you don't really need Kevlar to play it effectively. It returns 1.2 kills or $1,000 per kill, and based on experience, a player in rank can almost always get away with 1 kill if they're playing the KSG, and more likely than not, probably 2. That's $2,400 that the KSG returns, 2 players it has killed with its broken mechanics. I'm not going to go much into said mechanics, but since it will be fixed, but it's mainly because too much range, too fast of a reload, too much speed without Kevlar, and the damage and accuracy. And basically it forces a team to rotate if the KSG player is playing a checkpoint on the map, which is difficult to flush out with the utility. Even if the player dies, they can repeat the cycle with the money they earn and the bonus received from simply playing around. The KSG should have a place in the game where it's only good in situational fights, at close range without letting it overpower other weapons in areas it really shouldn't have an impact in. The KSG alters the game by its sheer presence, affecting the map control and pushes of breach players, and ultimately the timing of coalition players. This is okay in some instances if you look at the AWP in CSGO or even the U ratio. After all, if you knew a U ratio player was playing mid-raid for example, you wouldn't dry peek it with an AK normally. You'd have to use skill or some sort of utility or simply not challenge the fight at all. The KSG in this instance, however, is not a high skill weapon. There is no extensive reload time, complex spray pattern, or even difficult movement required to maximize the weapon's potential, which isn't stupid since it is a shotgun after all, albeit one that has too much influence over areas of the game that it shouldn't have, such as the ability to overpower rifles at even medium range. So far, we've talked about the overutilization of an OP gun. Now let's talk about the underutilization of the vast majority of guns and how it fits within the context of the economy. In order for the game to have depth and complexity, something required for players to see a need to invest time in a potentially engaging game, the economy has to be something the player has to learn and not just a cool aspect of the game. Not to insult the current economy, it has its purpose, but it's so watered down when paired with the bland state of weapons that you only have 1 out of 2 situations arising, not including when you buy a KSG of course. Either team saves or ecos, basically they buy a Rev or a deagle, no armor most likely, and maybe 1 or 2 util just to play for a headshot and try to get guns out the enemy hand and maybe go for a plant. That's considered a successful eco. Or the team can full buy with rifles, armor, and utility. That's it. That's all the options players currently have. No wonder it feels boring to play round after round, most of which seem no different from the last one. The game is just one of these 2 choices on loop until one team does it correctly 13 times in a row, or just 13 times in general, and the game is over, or until one team has had enough and they surrender. Currently, the state of SMGs leave a lot to be desired. They're too weak to fight anything reasonably, and even when they should be bought in second round, the current kill reward is so high that a losing team on pistol round can afford rifles and skip SMG's second round. Not to mention shotguns are currently more effective, and they're not only cheaper, but they give more money in return as well. Their current aim of pistol rounds is to kill enemy players rather than focusing on the main objective, the bomb plant. The players on the losing side of a pistol round can afford rifle second round and negate the advantage a pistol round is supposed to offer a winning team. It doesn't help that there's been many instances of eco rounds eclipsing full buys, when a successful eco is supposed to get a bomb plant or a couple kills and save a gun at most. Anti-ecos for these reasons don't exist outside of the KSG, since SMGs don't have a place in the meta, and even though there shouldn't be a meta in the game, and SMGs can be outgunned by revolvers and deagles. An example I found of this often in my games was when I played with Phoenix. He has a great YouTube channel, by the way, and I'll link in the description. You guys should check out his videos. He makes greatly informed content there. For some reason, this guy Phoenix was better with the TRG than a U-ratio. Don't ask me not how or why, but yeah. Essentially, because of his usage of the TRG, a skill-based weapon, he quickly maxed out his economy to $12,500, the max you can go in COPS. And he could offer weapon drops to his teammates when team economy was low. In addition, since a body shot from a TRG brings an opponent to half HP, a TRG greatly suits an eco round where a rogue player just needs to tag a player in the body who's already been tagged by a TRG to get a kill. This is the sort of niche role SMGs and TRGs should play. But first of all, TRG is too expensive and requires too much skill in comparison to other guns for the benefits it provides to really be worthwhile. And then we have SMGs, which I'll get into them right after pistol round, and also talk about the imbalance of rifles right now. Alright, first let's have a look at the abomination that is pistol round. Even the starting pistol each side is given at the start of a round doesn't make sense. We have the XD45, which in addition to being overpowered, something that has been repeatedly stated by the community and big content creators such as Stormed and others, is a run and gun type of weapon which is great at clearing space, an attribute that should be meant for breach players who are pushing onto a bomb site. Then there's the P250, a gun that has its moment and can be reliable, but is much more of an accuracy-based weapon that requires more aiming, something better for holding angles than peeking into them. A weapon ideally meant for coalition players that have to hold angles, but for some reason, these weapons are the starting weapons for the wrong side, which is confusing when you look at the playstyle that each defending and attacking side is supposed to embody. Breach is supposed to attack and would be better to benefit with a gun that allows them to rush onto site, while the coalition doesn't need an overpowered running gun weapon, but something to take longer, more accurate fights with. So my first suggestion would be to nerf the XD45 and the P250, but more of the XD, and swap the sides each pistol belongs to. Secondly, there's the underutilization of all the other pistols. Sure, there's the deagle and revolver, which aren't bad, but they're more used for eco rounds than pistol because of the slightly more firepower, and they don't have a place in pistol rounds because they just go for headshots on ecos. Maybe the deagle with its rate of fire has a place, but even the deagle doesn't stand a chance when the base pistols, which are already incredibly great, combined with their Kevlar, are more capable of dealing aim punch and damage against no Kevlar opponents. Since in order to buy deagle or rev, you can't afford Kevlar, which does make sense, but because of this, deagle and rev don't work. Now, is the solution to buff the deagle and revolver, or do something else? Well, no, we would not buff it here. I would actually argue that it would be better to nerf the base pistols so they don't overshadow the other pistols, not buff the other pistols. I'll just make everything overpowered. And this way there's more variety can be incorporated. What do I mean by variety? The lack of creativity on pistol rounds, such as the lack of utility and execution. Now, to some extent, it's pistol round. A full rush toward a bomb site makes sense. It's pistol round, and you just want to take the obvious fights and hope they don't stack the intended site, 5v2 or 5v3 a site, for an easy plant. But utility is almost never used. In fact, if you buy utility pistol round, it's almost clowned on in ranks because of the relative disadvantage it puts a player in who now can't afford body armor. Is this a player issue? No, the player can't be blamed in this instance because the combination of Kevlar and an overpowered base pistol is too strong. The solution, nerf base pistols, more of the XD than the P250, and again swap the sides of the base pistols. This should hopefully give more leeway for the GSR and dualies as well, and only slight modification is needed for these two guns. The first obvious one would be accuracy. Tapping with an akimbo weapon, which in this case is the dualies, is a staple of a more run and gun type weapon. And for some reason, tapping with the dualies is more accurate than the GSR, which is a weapon due to its small ammo capacity and lower fire rate, is only really good for headshots when opponents only buy body armor and no helmet, and where accuracy is essential. Spamming is not realistic with the GSR due to its low fire and low ammo capacity, and you really can't compete with like a P2 with the GSR. Solution: swap the damage stats of the dualies and GSR. Make the GSR more accurate while standing, yet much less accurate when moving, and make dualies less accurate when standing completely still, but more accurate relatively when running and gunning. Also slightly increase the mag capacity of the GSR to 10 or 12. Moving on to SMGs, I slightly touched upon this earlier, but I would recommend making them much stronger, not overpowered, but able to compete with rifles at ranges, let's say a random number, 10 to 12 meters, some small range, but have a significant damage reduction after that point, as well as a lower wallbang penetration and armor penetration relative to rifles. Finally, rifles are not in a bad position as of right now, but they themselves prove to create some serious issues in the game, mainly the SG and AUG. I will quickly touch over all of the rifles since they are the main standpoint of the game as a whole and are the foundation or destination that everything else really builds on or leads to in terms of guns. First, the SA-58. It's not at a bad place for the price, but I would recommend a slight reduction in the size of the burst cluster, basically make the cluster more tight and accurate essentially, and I would not change any of the damage values or range drop-offs, etc. The M4 does not need a significant rework, and I know some of you may be surprised by this, but I'll explain later on why it doesn't need a buff. The AR-15 is in a great place right now in relationship to other rifles. It's not overpowered, it serves its purpose with the scope, and it's great if a player practices with it. The AK-47, the gun is fine as of right now. It's a very skill-based gun, and it's a very skill-based issue that it's significantly overshadowed by the AUG and SG. The AK doesn't really need to change, mainly the AUG and SG. The Scar H, it doesn't need a major change, maybe a slight damage reduction from 55 to 50 or 52. The SG, okay, so the gun itself does not need much change, and maybe a slight damage reduction from 49 to 46. But the major issue with the SG is that it needs more recoil. I know if you compare its spray patterns to the AK, for example, it looks very similar, but most players can tell you that in practice, the SG's recoil is nowhere similar to that of the AK's. And I would also say the same applies for the AUG. As for the HK, it's in a very weird spot right now. It needs a price reduction. It simply just can't compete with the SG and AUG, and it does too little damage for its price. As you probably noticed from these changes, the big guns, the SG and AUG, in my opinion, only need a slight damage reduction, but need much more recoil. Why? Simply put, these guns do not take much skill to use. The AK and M4 are totally upset in terms of ability by these two giants, which, while because of an increase in price should be better with the proper application of skill, keyword skill, they simply over-trump the AK and M4 to a standard that just can't be allowed. The game encourages the SG and AUG to dominate too much in gunfights and incorporates too many random and non-skill based aspects to affect the game. This is probably the most pressing rework because the SG and AUG dominate in areas in which they're not supposed to, almost comparable to a KSG but not to the same scale. Players can take dry aim duels, basically meaning without any utility, against a U ratio player with either an SG or an AUG, which should never be the case without extreme practice or skill, especially since most of the aiming is already done by the aim assist for them. Most of the issues with snipers will be fixed as a result from the changes applied to the weapons mentioned above. I know a lot of this video was more content heavy, not really sure how much of you guys stuck around, but if you are interested, I will post more content in the future. You're welcome to challenge any of the recommended changes I presented in the comments and can contact me through my Discord, which will be in the description. Please be respectful in the comments. If you like the video, please share. I won't even ask you to subscribe. After all, this video was made pretty poorly, but please just spread the message and hopefully you can make an impact. Thank you and have a nice day.